From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
The 2024 presidential election, believe it or not, the campaign is already underway, even if not everybody is announced as a candidate. And Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump gave weekend speeches that contrast their different approaches for winning the Republican nomination. That is, if Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, decides to get in. He hasn't announced yet, although he has recently published a book and is going on something of a book tour that sounds almost like a soft campaign launch, or as somebody said to me, maybe not so soft launch. And of course, Donald Trump never does anything soft, and he's already geared up. We want to talk a little bit today about the speeches, what they tell us about the campaign so far. Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot, editor of the Wall Street Journal opinion pages, and I'm here with my colleagues Bill McGurn and Kyle Peterson. Welcome to you both. Ron DeSantis, Florida governor, out and about across the country, met with donors from the Club for Growth in Florida late last week, then headed out to the Reagan Library, a popular destination for Republican presidential hopefuls, and he gave a weekend speech, about 54 minutes, making his case for his Florida record on everything from COVID, school choice, crime, and the economy. Let's listen.
When the world went mad, when common sense suddenly became an uncommon virtue, Florida stood as a refuge of sanity, a citadel of freedom for people throughout the United States and indeed throughout the world. We refused to let our state descend into some type of Faucian dystopia where people's rights were curtailed and their livelihoods were destroyed. We made sure people had a right to work, and we got people back to work and businesses back open. We made sure that every school in the state of Florida in that 2020 school year was open because people needed to be in school. And I can tell you, we had families move from the Pacific Coast just for the fact that we had schools open in Florida when you didn't have them in many other states. We understood that the elite, the medical elite, whatever their intentions were originally, I don't know, but this devolved into something that became very political.
Well, that sure sounds like the basis for a campaign theme there. Florida is freedom when common sense became an uncommon virtue, not a bad phrase, and Faucian dystopia. Bill?
Yeah, I was going to mention that, Paul. As a recovering speechwriter, sounds like Faucian bargain, but that's pretty good. Faucian dystopia. If I was a speechwriter, I'd try to take credit for that. I think, like you said, DeSantis hasn't announced, but he's clearly in the game. And I think he did well. Basically, he's gearing up the model to be Florida versus California. It's in the subtitle of his book, Florida. And he's holding the model. We didn't close schools. We kept businesses open. We did all these good things. The irony is Florida has also become kind of a model to be a wedge against former President Trump. You know, he points out the closures that Trump was behind. And of course, he won his second election. So Florida serves him in two ways, both as a campaign theme against the Democrats. Look at our low taxes. We don't have critical race theory in the schools, that kind of nonsense. We were sane on the pandemic. And it's a powerful message against Democrats who have basically the California model. But it also holds a way to go after President Trump on substance by pitting his record against the president's.
I very much agree with that, Bill. DeSantis did mention Trump by name, but I think he is laying the groundwork for contrasting his approach to COVID versus Trump's approach to COVID in particular. And there was a good section in there where he said, look, public health officials have their concerns, but a statesman has a bigger concern. A governor has to balance many things beyond public health, including the economy, basic rights, fundamental rights, and education, schools. And a lot of our public health officials, elites, did not do that during the days of the pandemic. And I think that DeSantis has a pretty good campaign theme there. Now, the other thing I would elaborate on Bill's point to Kyle is that the Florida model also works as a case against Washington dysfunction. You know, if you have Republicans and Biden White House fighting all the time, he can say, look, I can help clean that mess up.
And backing up his argument, he has lots of good numbers and lots of good data. We heard him cite some of them in his recent State of the State speech, and he was back at it again at the Reagan Library talking about Florida as number one in net in-migration, people moving from other states. Number one, he said, in new business formations, or maybe it was beating those states in new business formation. Number one in parental involvement in education, educational choice. The other thing that on educational choice that jumped out at me in his speech is he said that in Miami-Dade County, the most populous county in Florida, 70% of students attend a school other than their local neighborhood school, what it would be going through the traditional districting process. I think that's a pretty stunning number. The other thing, to the point about drawing some contrasts that I thought was notable, and he didn't mention President Trump's name, but I think this is going to be a big theme for Ron DeSantis if he runs for president, is he says he knows how to win. My administration has not leaked like a sieve. You don't see drama or palace intrigue coming out of my administration.
That's good.
We have surgical precision execution. Because of that, we beat the left day after day after day. And I think that is a theme that you're going to be hearing a lot more from Ron DeSantis is, I can get you to the place that you want to go, but I can actually do it, as opposed to these other guys.
Interesting. The Florida legislative session also getting underway here, going to be on tap for the next couple of months. The big agenda things on education, expanding school choice, expanding limits on teaching about gender changes and sexuality from now it's K through 3, wants to extend that bill in the legislature, K through 8. There may be a further bill on abortion. Right now, the state abortion is legal up to 15 weeks. There may be an attempt in the legislature to put that down to maybe 8 weeks or so, something like a heartbeat bill when the fetus's heartbeat starts. We'll see if DeSantis gets behind that. There's going to be a whole list of things, Bill, that are lined up here. And the majorities are so big in Tallahassee, the Republican majorities, that pretty much if the governor's behind it, it would seem that it's going to pass. And of course, that's something that he will point to as well and say, see, I have delivered.
Yeah, and some of it is his own work, supporting other people that can help him get his agenda through. It's one of the differences with Glenn Youngkin in Virginia. In some ways, I think Glenn Youngkin has a more easygoing personality. He's very attractive that way, campaigned on the school issue and so forth. But he has a Senate in Virginia controlled by Democrats. And thus far, they've really thwarted big education change. And Virginia really needs it. It's behind in a lot of things like charter laws. And so you're right, DeSantis is going to point to that. I think the two things, vis-a-vis Trump, we're going to see a lot more DeSantis doing what he's doing, and it's deliberate. He doesn't mention Trump by name, but everything implicitly is saying, look at my record, how it compares to him. So there's one thing on Trump. And then the other thing, this weekend, he was at the Reagan Library. Obviously, everyone 40 years later, after Reagan made his first successful run for president, people still want to get the Reagan mantle. And one of the things that struck me is he compared to the 70s and said, people think the times are so bad, nothing we can do. And Reagan was saying our best days are ahead. And he's trying to say that now. And I think that's a very appealing message. It's not enough to go to war against all your political enemies. You have to have a positive vision. And I think that is a positive vision. That's Reagan-esque, to say, we don't deny that there are problems, but we have the wherewithal, we can fix them.
Yeah, I think that that's exactly what he does need. You make a good point about Glenn Youngkin. Youngkin, I think, does have a more appealing personality. He's a sunnier figure. DeSantis gives the impression of being a fighter, not a lover. That has a certain political virtue, but it's not a warm persona. Youngkin has, I think, more warmth, but Youngkin, he is set on trying to, there's an election in November in Virginia. They have off-year elections for the state Senate and the state House of Delegates. And Youngkin wants to turn that majority, needs 2 seats in the Senate. He's now approaching upper 50s in popularity in the state. And problem is, if he thinking about running for president, does he have to get in earlier than November? And then if that happens, does that complicate his ability to turn the state Senate his way? And if he turns the state Senate in November, would that be an important talking point for him if he did decide then later to run for president? So that's one of the Youngkin dilemmas. I think when it comes to DeSantis, the weakness of his speech that I detect is there's not a lot of humor there. There's not a lot of self-deprecation. He told an old joke, a well-worn joke early on, but he lacks that twinkle that Reagan had, and I think some of the best politicians have. Now, that may not be what voters are looking for this time, Kyle, but I do think a little more warmth and optimism would go a long way for him.
I agree with that. I mean, I do think there was more optimism in this Reagan Library speech than often voters hear from Ron DeSantis. And granted, in a half an hour or a 45-minute speech, I don't know exactly how long it was, you have the time to spin out some of that stuff. He was talking about, the founders. And I think what a lot of people nationally, at least, hear from Ron DeSantis is the clips of him tangling with journalists in these heated news conferences. And so, I mean, it was a slightly different tone, I think. But I agree in general with your comment. And Ron DeSantis, I think part of that is just he's a prickly personality. That's at least what I gathered just from watching him. But I think it could benefit if he's really thinking about running in 2024 to think about the persona that he's projecting to people. I mean, they always say an important thing in national politics is voters thinking about who they want to go have a beer with, or some famous poll results. I forget if this was 2012, the responses of people who thought that the candidate cares about people like me. And so maybe this is the beginning of a little bit of turn from Ron DeSantis as he's going national and going on this book tour to try to project some of that voters outside of Florida are not hearing from him day to day.